Dave Dederer, how are you doing today?
I'm fine here at the Central Saloon, also more commonly known as the Central Tavern. It was Central Saloon, I think.
That's right. So, yeah, the Central Tavern was the original name. Central Cafe at first, and then Central Tavern, then the Central Saloon.
Was there a lawsuit somewhere here, a fight or a cease and desist?
I don't really know, but I'm actually working on a quasi history of this area. So, there's not a huge amount of it. There's less information in the Central than one would think, right?
Well, most people who are here probably don't remember a lot.
Well, I'm talking about the 1890s.
Oh yeah, that was interesting. I don't know. So is there not much written history about Pioneer Square?
Oh, there's tons
here.
Yeah, there are tons.
Particular space.
This particular space there's not. So I found a beer hall that was here in 1870.
Well, that's a good start.
Yeah, and it was literally just called Beer Hall.
I like it. Yeah. It was the beer hall.
Yeah, the beer hall. Yeah, I'll show you pictures later at some point, but or you'll buy the book when I finally finish it.
Okay.
But anyway, in talking about the Central, when we were talking earlier, I was surprised to learn that you haven't really played here. Like this is
no, I've never played a full show here, and I was just saying when I walked in that I was playing music around Seattle like 83 to 85 quite a bit, and then from 85 to 89, I moved away from Seattle. And that was kind of peak Central, peak Vogue. And so I was not around for a lot of that. I was playing, there were other venues for that. There was a Pulse Ground Zero Gallery. We played a lot.
Right.
That was right around the corner from the Great News Gallery. Cool enough to go where you may.
That's right. That's right.
Rock and roll band of all time.
Oh, that's okay. We're going to touch on that in just a little bit.
We'll get into that. But so we were doing, and also we were underage. I turned 21 in the fall of 85 maybe. So for a couple of years we were playing around in what became that scene. I wasn't 21. It's when this venue like the Vogue had come to be here on.
Right. So it was like Guerrilla Gardens and
yeah, those places and some of those were even gone at that time. I think Guerrilla Gardens and the Grey Door might have even shut down. There weren't many options. We used to rent halls. We used to rent
Washington Hall.
Was that the one that's under the I-5 overpass? No. There was one. There was like a weird little grain hall that's up. The Ship Canal Bridge. We rented that a couple of times. At least once, kind of been a turnabout, the space where KEXP is now, and with the Cascade rooms.
Right.
You could rent those. I don't remember. It was only like a couple $100 maybe. So we would rent those, bring in the PA, and I think sleep in a keg and charge $3 to get in and whatever. So it was all catch as catch can.
Yeah, and there was a couple of places in Fremont too, and there was one in Northgate. I don't remember it, but supposedly in the mid to late 80s, it was a big, again, like sort of a house party sort of space, but it was huge.
I never went there. There were some good house parties that this guy was looking around seeing. Actually, one of my bands at that time, they were talking about the first show ever, which was this guy Paolo lived out toward Greenwood, and he had a garage where we would. Random Splandum, which then Whiting Tennis, of course, had Big Tube Squeezer, who I saw play here at least once. His prior band, they rehearsed there. So there were, people, it was much more random and improvised.
Right.
Home than it is now.
Yeah, and I miss that. So, talking about the Central, since we're here, I moved down to Pioneer Square for the first time, I think, in like 93. So I just turned 21. I think I turned 21 in 93, I want to say. And so just before I was 21 is when I was first down here.
Yeah.
And I used to walk through the windows, or by the windows here, and I'd actually like peek in.
Oh, sure.
And one time I've told the story to the current owner too. He finds it hysterical, but I was walking by and, peeking in. I think it was Love Battery. No, it wasn't Love Battery. Blood Circus. It was Blood Circus. Yeah. I was a huge Blood Circus fan.
Yeah.
And I stopped by, and obviously I was underage, and the bouncer knew it because he would see me, outside all the time. And this one time I was like, okay, go ahead, but, you can't do anything bad. like total crust. And I was like, of course not. And the first thing I did is head to the bar and buy a drink, and he like grabs me out the back and he's like, dude,
Yeah.
like I would have let you in, but no, sorry.
Oops.
So that kind of ended my my visits to the Central underage.
Yeah.
But I mean, great bands, and it was weird that the sound seemed both so great and so bad at the same time. Not just from here, that time period, right? All of the shows kind of had weird
of course, obviously everybody's kind of trying to max enough the capability of the PAs at that time. The PAs were it cost a lot more money to have a lot less power and clarity these days.
Right.
But at that time, everything was just kind of thrown together.
And all analog too. Like there was no digital going on at all.
No, there wasn't. It was all just cobbled together. And some places sounded great. Some places did just go for it.
I think it was the OK Hotel. I'm sure. Did you play the OK? Yeah, I'm sure you did. I think it was the OK that had the most insane like soundboard I think I've ever seen. Like it looked like somebody had duct taped a bunch of different parts together, and like this was a sound. Maybe it wasn't the OK. It was somewhere around here. It wasn't the Central either. But it literally looked like this Franken monster.
Yeah, people just, I think, did, there weren't any plug and play solutions.
No, not at all.
Now you can put it together. I remember buying a practice PA, or we used to get gigs too at American Music in 1983 or 84 and paying way too much. Terry Gottlieb, who worked there, he might still work there. He worked there for 30 or 40 years. I going in there and like, we got this weird power amp, and there are these snicks and things, and maybe these speakers will work. We just paid a couple $1,000 and figured it out.
Yeah, it's do you know Jim Bassnight?
I'm not friends with him, but I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've known him for quite some time, and he's one of those guys where one time I had a studio problem. It's like I think it was something like this. We were doing a podcast live, in Edmonds, and I was like, hey, I've got this, this problem. And he like, just like in his little bag of tricks. Just like, right. Here we go.
Yeah.
And I'll like, peel off a bit of a cable and splice it together.
Totally.
And I'm like, okay, great, man.
I still feel like I can do that, walk into any venue. And if you ever figure out the PA, I can, you definitely had to for that to do that.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. But I think that also, that made innovation a little interesting. Like, one of my favorite bands during that time period, the early 90s, was The Pleasure Elite, right?
Yeah.
And bands like them and Chikung and whatnot, they were, kind of pushing the boundaries of what Seattle would accept.
Yeah.
But they were certainly pushing the boundaries of what the venues could deal with in terms of both the sound and crowd. Yeah. And I found that really interesting.
Chikung was interesting. I think we played once with them out in the courtyard of Western Washington University. They were a cool band.
That would be quite the lineup.
Yeah, like sure. That could be wrong, but
I could somehow see that, but it would be kind of odd, because like you take. Now we're going to start getting into your career a little bit, Dave. You have a band, the Presidents of the United States, which kind of would stand for everything that Chikung would be anti. That's kind of a funny little mix-up.
I mean, we're all for art. We're all for love and self-expression and bringing a joyful sound to other people. So. I don't know that it's all the same game. I mean, that's an interesting thing in the change business. You might think that people have kind of different perspectives, but if your job is to figure out how to get up on stage and kind of surprise to wow people and make them reflect on being human, then you meet someone like Tony Bennett and you have more in common with him than you might expect.
Right.
Both doing the same job, basically, right?
Yep,
and
absolutely.
It's coming from the same place in your heart. So, I feel that there's really strong commonality among musicians, especially.
Without a doubt. I've seen, like, I used to do a lot of metal stuff. Like, it's almost embarrassing to say, but not really. I'm a hair metal kid at heart. Like, I love that stuff. And I remember sitting with somebody who's not super well known, but kind of well known, or was, in the 80s. And there was an old jazz musician like out on the street, and this guy was like fawning, and that connection was really awesome to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and all musicians start as fans, right? Yeah. So that doesn't ever go away. I think, and that's always the ongoing motivation. It's just that you heard something, it gave you a feeling and you want to get closer to, my whole motivation playing music was just, I loved music since my earliest memories. And I just wanted to get closer to those feelings. And I thought, well, that's the way to get closer to those feelings. If I learned how to make the sounds, maybe I'm getting closer to those feelings. And I think it's true. I did get closer.
So I keep threatening where you get into your career, and I swear to God we are going to in just a second. So, you came from Bush School, which for people who don't know is I think a friend of mine kind of compared it to somewhere between Exeter and for Seattle, somewhere between like Exeter and like Andover, maybe like something along those lines.
It's a private independent school in Seattle, and I went there. It started as a girls' school. We're not going to do a podcast in Seattle. Secondary schools. Kind of when I was that age in the 70s, there was Lakeside School and Bush School.
Right.
And the other options were all not very developed at the time. Now there are 10 or 12 really, really good private independent schools.
Right. Seattle Academy
because you had, changing demographic here, and you're also in Seattle public schools have struggled for a long time. So there are tons of things. At that time, I had a really bad fifth grade public school teacher, and at my elementary school, and I was also getting in trouble, like shoplifting and doing stuff. And I think my parents just looked at me
you're doing.
So sixth grade, I went to Bush School along with a couple of my other best friends from my neighborhood. And and at that time it was it had been an all-girls school. It had converted to co-ed from the early to mid-70s. And most of my teachers were a bunch of Aquarium, which idealistic hippie freaking stuff.
Right.
So I was pretty lucky. I had a great environment which was very supportive, free, and encouraged all kinds of intellectual and artistic exploration. And I think it's not, other, like Stone from Green River, but on Pearl Jam, he went to Northwest School. There was some encouragement. There was a vibe that was encouraged.
Definitely. So I'm gearing up to the show. The one thing that's really hard to find any information on with you is that kind of gap between, like, I know you taught.
Yeah.
And you ended up teaching at your alma mater, correct?
Eventually, for a couple of years, And that period, well, we were talking about it a little bit. So I was, in high school, I was contemporaneous with a lot of the people. A lot of people who became the, whatever you want to call them, grunge standouts were not from here, right?
Right.
But others were. Like, Stone is a family friend, and actually named after his dad. His dad and my dad were super good friends. So we don't hang out all the time, but we've known each other since he was born and I was a toddler. And used to do stuff with their family. So I knew him. And then other people were around, I don't know, everybody knew each other. Like I mentioned, I think he made the greatest rock band of all time. I grew up in the same neighborhood with Tom Price, and went to he went to Bush School and middle school. And then Pop Effect, who are on a poster behind us, was the original bassist in that band, but the other two, Al Anderson's the guitarist singer, and I went to high school with him. And Nick Scott was also at Bush School and middle the drummer for Pop Effect.
Right.
So, and then Duff McKagan was kind of in an adjacent neighborhood, and then
Roosevelt. Right?
He was in Ravenna Bryant. And when I, after grade school, my best friends from grade school became all this crossover. That all crossed over. So all these people were around, and I started playing music in high school. I had one band at the end of high school with this guy, Steve Van Loo, who had a band called My Eye.
Right. Yeah, I remember them.
And we had a band called Overlord, who should have been awesome.
Now, I do know Overlord because the metal stuff in Seattle, I love that.
Overlord were amazing. And in my opinion, they were actually kind of the first quote-unquote grunge band, because they were coming from a metal perspective, but they were also, understood the Stooges and,
right.
So Steve lived across the street from me, and Dave, his older brother, was like cool rock guitar guy, and at that when we were all that age, and so all these people were around, and I went away 82, 83 for my freshman year in college and had a van there. And then I moved back here, and then I lived here for 2 years, 83, the fall of 85. And at that time had, a band with my best friend Kermit Rosen, who then went to Portland and started a band called Slack, who were super popular locally in the late 80s and early 90s. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. So we played around like as we are saying, at Ground Zero Gallery and these other venues in the early to mid 80s. And then I moved away. I finished college and on the East Coast, and then I lived in Denver and taught there for 2 years. So I was not around at the height of as it grew, grew and exploded. Oddly, through all that, I went to middle school and high school with my bandmate, Chris Ballou, and we weren't friends in high school at all, but he's a year behind me. We started collaborating, I think, the year after he graduated. So through that whole period, he and I were we were both moving around either to go to school or work or whatever. But that, we'd been really kind of going at it off and on for 10 years before we started what was President's 93. So we'd really started collaborating in probably the summer of 83. We had a band called the Dukes of Pop, who we kind of ruled the last exit open mic for 2 or 3 summers.
That I do remember, because that was the last exit.
We would get, if we were both in town in the summer, we'd play on the street or we'd get a gig opening for someone. So I was always playing. And then when I moved back to Seattle in 1989, I just was not. There were some bands I liked, but I knew everybody on the scene, but I wasn't I joined pretty quickly this country show band. I think it was through an ad in the Rocket, Marie Delaney and her Midnight Fair band. And I did that for 2 or 3 years. It was fun. We actually we headlined early in its life, the Ballard Seafood Fest. It was nice. It was good pro musicians. The drummer was this guy, Pete, who was in a band called the Swingin' Swamis, who were killer. Other good, pro musicians in the band. We had this one lady lead singer, Marie Delaney, and 2 backup singers. That was fun. And I was doing that. But I was around. So my sister, Claire, at that time, for many years, she went out with Ed Fotheringham, who was in Thrown Ups and who wrote a bunch of, Sub Pop record covers and was kind of a fixture on the scene. And I knew, or I would play, I was in a weekly poker. He lived in the same house with Jason Finn, who became our drummer, and Steve Turner, and Bill Campbell lived in the house for a while, who was in Flop. So I was playing poker. I just wasn't into going out and hearing. Let's put it this way. In any given era and any scene, there's some really good music and a lot of really mediocre music, right? Definitely. So I wasn't into just going out to be on the scene. I did go hear certain bands, that I was looking at. There's a great picture hanging on the wall above us of Screaming Trees. When Barrett was on drums. And I saw them multiple times. And when those guys were all, when Mark was not skinny sprung out yet, and Barrett had joined on drums. They were one of the most impressive. They were terrifying. Yeah. Those 4 huge human beings on stage playing this great music. They were. So I would go out to hear certain bands, but I was not into this being out and about.
I actually had Gary Lee on almost I think just shy of a year ago.
Yeah,
and. Such a nice guy, man. I mean, such a nice guy.
I thought of him. I was passing through Ellensburg last weekend on my way to a mountain bike race. So we stopped at the Taff in Ellensburg, had dinner, and just reminded me of those guys. And I could imagine being them, being in high school there, what they might have been experiencing.
And so he moved. He now lives now. I mean, he's been there for 20-some years, but in the San Marco, I think. Texas, in the middle of nowhere.
On his Facebook page or wherever,
And, I was joking with him. I'm like, so you went from the middle of nowhere to the middle of nowhere. How does that feel? He's like, but I lived in New York in between, so it's okay.
Yeah. Right? You got to take. So, I would go out and hear stuff, and I was definitely knew what was going on. I actually had, in the early 90s, I had this garage band called the Cascades with 2 of I was more into, all my friends from high school and what I wanted to do, go out and be in the woods. We were all going, rock climbing, mountain skiing. That's what I was doing. I didn't want to hang out till 3 a.m. with a bunch of junkies.
Right.
That was what I would see. By the same token, I was still deeply moved by and excited about playing music. So I just kept doing it. Yeah, like we had this great band, the Cascade, and we played it. We played it at a house party at my sister's with every grungy person there.
Right.
So we were around that, but I didn't really care. I was not interested in any of that.
And I think that succinctly defines the Seattle attitude, during that time period too. And then that's what makes the whole thing so weird. And I don't want to fixate on this because I think it's been talked about ad nauseum, right?
Yeah.
But the interesting thing to me is like there are, and I'm going to say less than 100 people that kind of made up the core.
It's a pretty small group.
Very small.
I mean, if you go back to that kind of, a lot of it was Northeast Seattle. You mentioned Jim God's Night, who lived out by Eckstein, I think, in kind of Wedgwood neighborhood. But he was out there, all the Fast Blacks guys. Right. I think they all went to Nathan Hale, Kurt and Lulu and Kim, and then Duff lived in Rebecca Bryant, and a bunch of that kind of like the veins, like Chris Grass and Andy Fortier. That was all kind of Roosevelt centric. So there was a lot of it was a very small number of people. And then the pop effect, like Al Anderson lived out in that neighborhood. It was a small group of people. And obviously there were lots of people that went, it's all sorts of scenes.
Oh yeah. Interesting. Very interesting.
So, but yeah, what became kind of the genesis of that punk rock, or immediate post-punk and into the quote-unquote grunge era. It was a small group of people. And I say that now, I'm playing now in like, I'm having fun playing basically cover music, what, for lack of a better word, you could call dad bands.
Right.
But it's super fun because the option is I could start another band that's like my songs or originals, and I could go play in Sunset Tavern. Right. And it would be the same 51 people I've seen at shows since I was 12 years old. And they all come and they get a PBR and stand with their arms folded and nod. We play for 40 minutes and they go, that was pretty cool. And rather, what I'm doing now is doing these fun gigs where there's like 100 to 400 drunk grown-ups who will dance for 2 or 3 hours to songs they love and that I love to play. And that's way more. That's kind of what I always wanted to do. Like I lived in Ravenna for a while in like 89 and 93. And the Scarlet Tree was on Roosevelt.
Oh, I love that place.
And I loved it because I could walk down there. One of my uncles was part owner and bartender. And but they had live music 4, 5, 6 nights a week. It was a totally mixed crowd, kind of racially and culturally. And it was kind of the only place in Seattle that I went at that time where it was like killer cover bands and like a whole bunch of people having a good time dancing. Right. Which I loved. I reckon my band in college, in my 2 years on the East Coast, I had a funk band. And you play for 3 or 4 hours and people dance. And then the country show band I was in, the only reason people go to hear country music is to dance.
Right.
So
yeah, they're not going to stand there with their arms crossed like, oh, this is great.
Like great. Really love that cover of that.
Right.
Click wax on. So I'm really having fun playing music that people want to dance to.
Yeah, I get that.
Wow.
So okay, we've skirted this entire issue and we're limited on time here. So I'm going to go to it.
Okay.
So you like to play music that and I've got the time on you, man. I'll give you a warning here. You like to play music that makes people dance. Now, this is a perfect segue. So you started, we've gotten your history up until the time when you actually basically started the Presidents.
Right.
So you and a former classmate who you've been playing around with, Chris Ballou, you've been playing around with off and on for 10 years or so.
Bands off and on. We'd had a band a few years before called Go when Chris was living down for a year. We played at Croc and a bunch of other places. He moved back in the end of summer, fall of 93. I was just starting grad school at the UW in urban design and planning. I had, for some reason at the time, I was paying $50 or $100 a month to share a rehearsal space with, I think it was like the Posies, Flop, and 7 Year Bitch.
Perfect.
I was up on Capitol Hill. And I think at the time I just wanted a space to be able to go in and sing into a microphone and play loud. And I might have been trying to collaborate or something. Anyway, I just remember Chris moved back to town that summer, fall. I had to practice bass. And as we always did when we got together, it's like, hey, do you have any songs? Do you have any songs? Yeah, let's get together. So we just started playing. And he had the songs at the time that were based more around this tunings that we ended up using, just open tunings with limited strings. He'd been playing a lot in Boston where he'd been living right before he came back with Mark Sandman.
Right. I wanted to get into that.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to have time, but that's a great.
Oh, yeah. From Morphine. So Mark, Chris went to college in upstate New York, and then he moved back and forth kind of between New York and Boston for a few years, and Seattle before he finally moved back here full time. And during his time in Boston, he and Mark Sandman became really good friends. And for those who don't know, Mark Sandman was kind of a Boston rock legend. He was a guitar player and singer in a band called Treater, right? Who was sort of a post-punk rootsy rock and roll band. And then he started a band called Morphine, which was himself, Mark, on two-string slide bass, and then a baritone saxophone player and a drummer. Fantastic band. And they became fairly solid touring. I think they headlined at the Summer Nights at the Pier here. They played, the pillbox size venues of the world.
Yeah.
They were quite popular live draw. So anyway, Chris and Mark Chris and Mark in the early 90s had a jam band called Supergroup.
Right.
And they would play some Irish pub in Boston, but got to be a few of them.
And, one or two. Well, just one or two.
They wouldn't get paid anything. They just get free beer. And the deal was Mark would show up with a couple of amps and a few oddly strung open tuned instruments.
Right.
They had a few different drummers they worked through. The drummers were not allowed to have cymbals because cymbals are too noisy.
Right. Makes sense.
The drummers would have like pieces of plywood or wood blocks or whatever instead of cymbals and a full kit. And they would just set up, start drinking preemptively, prophylactically, which is important. And then they just made up songs on the spot. And Chris is brilliant at that. And it's a muscle that he's exercised over the years. So there are some songs on the First President's record that started as supergroup jams.
Right.
So when Chris moved back to Seattle, he had been, and we had been through the 10 years of trying to write little pop songs, boy girl pop songs. And then he'd just gone through this experience of like doing all this improvisatory make up songs on the fly, freestyling.
Right.
And that all kind of came together. So we started, I think he came back, he had some of those songs. We got together a couple of times. I tried to play, previously we'd had bands where I'd often played 6-string acoustic cuts. Right. So I tried doing that, but that didn't really work with you really needed those tunings or the droning and strings. So I started playing that. And then we had the whole idea about, the story of how Jason joined, and we had it. So Chris had and still has pretty bad tinnitus. And it was really bad at that time because he had been spending a lot of time in a cinder block room in Boston playing really loud music. Right. Yeah. So he came back and said, I don't want to play loud, so we're not going to have a drummer. And I was like, totally cool. And actually, we'll probably put it out sometime in the next year. There's our first demo because we played in the fall of 1993. We played, 6 or 8 or maybe more shows as a duo under different names. We were the Dynamic Duo, then we were Pure Frosting, we were the Lo-Fis. And then finally, Chris came up with the name. And all along through this, so we'd had a band a couple of years before when Chris was here called Go. It was me and Chris and Dave Thiele, whom we called the fourth president, each other, friend of Chris's, on drums. And Jason saw us play a show at the Crocodile. And the band was good, and we were already pretty good at doing what we eventually did in the Presidents. And we did, like Dave Thiele played drums standing up, and he opened the show with a drum solo playing the drums. I think he had one drumstick and one ukulele, which he just smashed over the course of the drum solo.
Love it.
And then we did other shit like in the middle of my sister had a good friend at the time, Steve someone or other, who was a college baseball player, and I planted him in the back of the crowd with a softball, and I had a mitt on my
that's hysterical.
And I was like middle of the set. I just like picked up the mitt, smacked it a few times, like, anybody got a ball? And this guy, Steve, just fires a line drive across everybody's heads with a crocodile. It's smacked.
I love it.
I catch it. At the end of the show, Jason, at this point, is engaged and thinks it's interesting. And had brought a chair to right in front of the stage. And then somehow, I think in our last tune, I played some ridiculous feedback guitar solo on my acoustic guitar and he did a lap dance while I did it.
Love it.
So then the running joke for years at the weekly poker game and otherwise when I see Jason, which was regularly, is like, if you're Chris having another player, and I'm going to be a drummer, about a drummer.
I love it.
And so he was a big rock star, right? He was in Love Battery. He's the Poker Pipe Street. He's the cool guy. And we were these joys. It's like, I'm going to be your next day. So we started playing as a duo in the fall of 93. And he's like, okay, I'm going to be the drummer. And it became this big kind of, you know, moral or artistic dilemma because Chris and I had many long debates like, well, do we want to have a drummer? Do we want to deal with the third drummer? Can we keep it quiet enough with the drummer? Eventually we acquiesced, and Jason, if you listen to the first record especially, and he never, ever got to have big crash cymbals. So the first record, he has hi-hats, I think no ride, and a tiny little splash cymbal, and the drums are really taped up and quiet. So he joined, and honestly, it was, you know, Chris and I had always had, you've played music, you know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Chris and I always worked from the first time we ever sat down together for whatever reason. We just had mojo. And I remember getting in the rehearsal room, how far Jeopardy, though I can't remember which room we were in at the time. It was just it's like it's the moment we started playing with Jason. And the first show we played was at the Romper Room, which became Tiny Bass.
I love the Romper Room.
We played in the Romper Room, and it was just like obvious. He's just
that's great.
Yeah, no, this just.
So it seemed to happen relatively rapidly.
Happened really fast. So Jason joined. We played a couple shows with them. We played once or twice there. We played at the College Inn Pub
I'd love
on New Year's Eve of 93, 94. We played a few more shows. We went and made what could be called a demo, but we didn't. It wasn't a demo because Jason was in another band who thought, I'm in love with it. I'm just doing this for fun. We went and recorded a 10-song cassette with at the Laundry Room with Barrett Martin. And actually, a couple of those recordings are on our debut album, remixed and with some other re-recording. And Jason started selling it from behind the bar at the Common.
I seem to remember this.
Playing it on the stereo there. And that all happened in a matter of a few months. And then at the time, Chris had met Beck and had played on One Foot in the Grave, a little slide guitar. And then when Beck blew up with Mellow Gold and Loser, he put together a band and he hired Chris to be kind of multi-instrumentalist. Sideman. So we made our little cassette, and all of a sudden, all people were getting this really strong reaction at shows. And then Chris left town, and Jason selling these things behind their, you know, I mean, we sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, which was amazing for a band that started a couple of months before and wasn't playing out. So Chris was on tour with Beck for a few months, and you know, Jason and or I were calling him at some point going like, dude, you got to come back because it's just like, you're not even here and people want to book us. And then Chris actually got kicked out of Beck's band by Beck. But Beck didn't have the balls to do it himself. John Silva, a famous manager. That's a whole other fun story. He got kicked out of the band for smiling too much. You know, because at that time, Beck was real, like, I'm a little serious guy. I'm going to be the loser, the next Thirsty Moore now. And, you know, a year later, he was wearing like a captain's hat and a silk suit. But anyway, Chris got kicked out of the band. He came back, and that was probably late spring, early summer 1994. And we started playing again, and all of a sudden we could just play. You know, for then the next year, 9 months, we just played a lot, and all of a sudden there were, you know, people phoned. I think at that time there were 8 or 9 major labels. Everybody but Interstroke wanted to sign us.
That's excellent.
So every time we played, there was somebody there. In Seattle, we were playing, all of a sudden we were just packing, just out of nowhere.
That's crazy.
And it was crazy. Yeah, we were, you know, and I was still going to graduate school. It was a 2-year program, and we were playing, you know, we kind of pushed the limits. Like there was the whole like, oh, you can't only play more than once or twice a month. We're like, okay, we're going to play every week.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not?
This week, played Color Box, or not Color Box, or whatever that, play at Moe's, then play at the Weather Wall, then play, and it just all of a sudden, so just kind of happened. Yeah.
So you go from this, and it's funny because your story it's unique, but it's not unique at the same time. That seemed to just happen to certain people in Seattle. Not just happen. Obviously, a lot of hard work goes into it. But,
of course.
That's a given, but there's so you go from that, and a lot of bands get to that point. Not a lot, but some bands get to that point, and they don't go the extra mile, right? So there's a lot of regionally famous bands.
Yeah.
What was it like when you the first time you were outside of Seattle and you had like a sold out venue of any size? It actually doesn't even matter. But.
Well, it's funny. We joked during the year I was talking about, like at that time we could go sell out Mo or a Croc and there would be, whatever it is, 600 or 700 people inside, right, and 500 to 1,000 people outside trying to get in. It was crazy for a few months.
Love that.
And yet, as we joked, we could go to Bellingham or,
and 3 people would show up.
Yeah, and not get arrested. So we started to experiment with that, but it's pretty weird when there are weird moments, because then we went from that to signing a record deal and having a hit record pretty quickly. And there were some weird moments. We were willing to go the extra mile and do the extra work in various ways along the way. And that's maybe another podcast about how that works. But like we did a record came out, our debut record came out on Paplama locally in March of 95. We're still getting courted by all major labels. Jason didn't even really decide till, it was that all during this Love Battery went from having done 3 records for Sub Pop.
Right.
They had just gotten signed to A&M,
right,
Atlas label.
Right.
And during the summer that I described, where Chris moved back here and the President's all of a sudden blew up, he was going out to Bear Creek every day to record Love Battery's major label that used Straight Freak Ticket, which in fact, listeners, is a fantastic record and you should go find it.
And anything by Love Battery, by the way, is fantastic.
And so Jason had to make a decision, which was hard. He, he'd been doing Love Battery for 7 or 8 years, and all the cool kids, other than maybe Tim Vale, who really liked the Presidents, were like, it was interesting. You got to stick with Love Battery,
right?
And blah blah blah. Anyway, so he didn't even really commit to, us until I guess around the time I think he saw the writing on the wall. It became obvious there was industry buzz that we were going to do something. Anyway, the record came out in March 95 on Paplama. We signed a deal committed to Sony Columbia in May 1995, and they were pretty cool. I give Donnie Einer, was the president of the label, credit and said, "You give me a verbal commitment now." And we signed the agreement by the start of June. I will have your record out around the world by mid-July. And he did it,
that is aggressive. Yeah, that is crazy. Super aggressive.
In the physical media era, and that was insane. To set up a record in 2 months with no contract signed. So, but they did it. And then all of a sudden in August and September of 1995, I'm getting to my XUG question. We went out on a promo tour. We did like a month in the US and a month in Europe. And they were crazy days where we'd probably fly once or twice a day, play at, record sales warehouses, play on the street, played like in LA, played at Pink's Hot Dog Stand, played on Third Street Promenade in Santa Monica. All in one day. So I had some crazy, crazy days. But to answer your question, like, what was it like when all of a sudden there were a couple, so we were going around and it was mostly to get to, record retailers at that time, important, and radio stations, right? So the advance of Lum and the album had come out in early July, and some stations had already started to name some influential ones like WHFS in Washington, D.C., who, along with K-Rock in L.A. and 99X in Atlanta, really set the playlist for that genre of music. So, I mean, those were some of the first moments where, I remember we traveled around the country with, Chris and I both had these tiny amps that we could carry on the plane and carry our guitar on the plane. Jason had a drum kit that basically fit in a small, executive suitcase from the 50s.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that then would turn he had a way to attach the kick pedal to the suitcase itself. So that was the kick drum.
I love that.
So we had this ridiculous little toy drum set. And so sometimes that was perfect. We'd walk into a radio station that wasn't playing the single yet.
Right.
And we'd like set up on a fucking boardroom table and be like, okay, fuckers, it's Brown Bag Wednesday. Bring in your lunch and we're going to rock you out. And, noon in an office park in suburban Houston or whatever. But then all of a sudden we played like, okay, you're going to do this promo. We're going to do another one of these things for WHFS. They're really supporting the single. We're going to play on the Inner Harbor in Baltimore.
Nice.
It's good. It's cool. So, okay, we get there. It's like a little complex, kind of like South Lake Union here. And there's amphitheater. And like 5,000 fucking kids show up.
Oh.
We've got a little toy. So there were some weird moments like that where all of a sudden it was like, oh.
That's so funny.
Oh, this is getting some, this is turning into something.
And it's funny because at that time, like if my memory serves right, like you're talking about the same time as like the Gorillas were doing their thing, right? And right about that same time period, right? 94, 95?
Yeah, right in the same
Right
time.
around that.
Yeah.
And that was sort of, it was kind of interesting to me because that was when, like I had never been a huge fan of what I like to call kind of comedy rock, right? Except for like they might be giants or whatever.
Yeah.
And by comedy rock, I don't mean like it's comedy. I mean, it's quirky, quirky rock. And it was funny because there was suddenly like this group of bands, and there's only a few, like 4 or 5 of them, and suddenly like they were all over the airwaves, and you guys were one of them.
Yeah,
and
just naked ladies. I'm trying to think who are. I never got that whole side of it, like especially in Germany. You're from Seattle and we're not grown.
Right.
You're still not. I'm like, okay, have you heard of Chuck Berry? Have you ever listened to a Chuck Berry song? They're pretty clever.
They're happy and
have you listened to maybe a quarter to a third of the Beatles catalog?
Right.
Is usually kind of jokey, if not outright comedy. I mean, rock and roll is supposed to be funny. Have you listened to a Bo Diddley song?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you listened to a Little Richard song?
That's right.
Have you listened to, So, yeah, I never really got that whole, like, yeah, I'm going to smile. And,
right, exactly.
Yeah, it's okay for the songs to be, like, the other one is, have you ever read a verse or the chorus of Nirvana Smell Like Teen Spirit?
Oh, it's comedy.
Fucking hilarious.
Yeah, it's pure comedy.
A mulatto, an albino, my mosquito,
right?
my libido. I mean, that's totally absurdist.
Right.
Hilarious.
And
hilarious stuff.
And one thing that people don't understand is up until, until that fame sort of started to happen with some of these bands, they were smiling and joking and drinking beers on stage and whatever. And it was basically, it became, unfortunately, it almost became like a self-parody, like just because of the way it kind of unfolded.
That's true.
And that's kind of sad, but we're down to just a couple of minutes. I have one last question for you. Okay. So
we're fine.
We're fine.
We are getting down to a couple.
Yeah, we're getting down to a couple. And this is just another reason to bring you back on at some point.
Well, we can do
this
that.
This is fun. One of the questions I like to ask, and just because it's fun, normally ask a question about music, and you know what? We've only talked about music, so let's talk about something else. What is something about you that even your most diehard fans, and by the way, you have some really, really, really insane fans out there.
7 or 8 of them,
No, I think
they're keeping it alive.
I think there's a couple more than that, but yeah, they're out there. Your Reddit IMA was hysterical.
Yeah.
So what is something that about you that we're totally surprised, even those weird fans?
God, I don't know. I mean, I'm usually pretty blabby about what I do. I mean, I think what might be surprising is that I really like doing sports activities, and I don't know if I had to choose between the two, or if I would choose that over music, but I don't know. I mean, it might be surprising that I used to be a very avid and pretty good finalist, and I used to, in terms of, for people who saw the movie Free Solo, I didn't free solo El Capitan. I free soloed plenty of stuff where, to a layperson, you would look at me, 100 feet off the ground on a vertical thing and just be like, that's fucking crazy. And if you slip or anything goes wrong, you will die, which is true. So I used to do a lot of that kind of stuff. I don't know if that was a surprise, but I don't know.
No, I would say that would be a surprise.
I have a lot of good secrets or surprises.
That's actually a pretty good one. I think the best answer I've ever gotten from that was from Eddie Spaghetti.
What did he say?
He said, I like to play tennis all the time, and he wears tennis shorts when he goes out and does it. And imagining him doing that is really funny, just because of his persona.
I didn't know that he liked to play tennis.
Yeah.
I like to play tennis too. And,
You should. You should.
play with. I don't think I have any crazy. I mean, I guess I'm sporty, which is not very rock and roll. I still like him on the ski racing team.
Right.
To, go out and
It's fun.
trips around the mountains. And that's kind of, I think of that much more as my identity than
Music?
the other ones. And although,
Well, you almost have like a charmed, and of course, from your perspective, maybe not, but from the outside, maybe a tiny bit of a charm, a charmed life, and that, you kind of got to do a bunch of stuff. You were a teacher at some top-rated high schools in the country. You had, a couple of bands that did extraordinarily well.
yeah.
You're a good dad. You've got, whatever.
I don't know how I
think you're charmed.
back. I mean, I had 6 or 7 careers. I was a teacher. I did some public relations, PR stuff. I played music for a living. I ended up spending 15 years in digital music and doing some interesting stuff there. I have no idea. I guess maybe. I think that's a thing that people often don't get about musicians, especially because where you kind of just touched on it a few minutes ago. Certainly in the rock and roll era, there's sort of and especially during and after punk rock, there's musicians can and will present themselves as not giving a shit or being laissez-faire.
Right.
The reality is that I and anybody I know is kind of like this. It's just something I go with all it.
Absolutely.
And absolutely driven, intense people. I thought of it the other day, watching The Dirt.
Mm-hmm. It's a great movie.
Pretty good.
I like
it. Yeah, it was good. And you get that from that. And then I'd heard more, firsthand. I mean, I know my own experience. I know my friends' experiences. I've heard depth stories about Guns N' Roses in those early days where, you see these characters who just like complete reprobates and alcoholics and drug addicts. And, a lot of them were alcoholics and drug addicts, but so are a lot of, senior executives in corporate America. And what I don't see is that you kind of see it in The Dirt, is that, these guys were working 24/7, 365, and completely focused on a goal and completely driven to achieve it. Maybe there might have been a lot of carnage along the way, but really like a lot of kind of ambition and just straight up hard work.
I think that, the best advice I always give to musicians when I talk to them, like I don't really have a platform on which to talk to them about, I'm not like, famous for anything, but the advice that I do give when I do come across musicians is to treat your band like a startup, right? It's really a startup.
That's what I tell kids. And I'm like, of course I get lots of, I'll often get asked by friends to talk to their kids or nephew, niece or whoever.
Sure.
And I always say, like, obviously I've had other professional careers, so I have some experience knowing how hard it is, but like imagine, how hard it is to be a doctor or a lawyer. Right. And that's a totally prescribed path. That's right. You still have to do the work, but if you want to do the work, you know what to do. You got to do really well in high school. Then you have to go to undergraduate school. And if you want to be a doctor, you got to do chemistry or some kind of major that supports that. Then you got to crush the MCATs and go to grade school. And those,
that's right.
Blah, blah, blah. And then you got to go through med school, and then you got to do your residency. But all the steps are laid out. So in terms of being a musician or a writer, my sister's a successful writer or anything in the arts, you have to work just as hard, but there every day you wake up and you have to make up your job description. You have to decide what it is you're supposed to do. You have to completely reinvent yourself and invent what your path is every day. And so that's my message always. Is like, okay, you think it's hard to be a lawyer, or a doctor, or an MBA, senior executive. It's just like that, but way harder because there's no prescribed path. There's no There's no roadmap. You got to make it up every day.
Absolutely, man. Hey, and that is a perfect place to kill it, and perfectly on time. Dave, thank you so much, man. That was awesome. Anything you want to say other than goodbye?
No, we'll do it again.
We'll do it again. Hey, there we go. All right. Cheers, Dave.